The sound of sirens was the last thing he remembered clearly. His voice had already cracked, desperate, when he screamed into the phone that something was eating him alive. The words hardly made sense, even to him. How could they? How do you explain to anyone that your body is rotting while you're still breathing? But before that frantic call, before the flashing red and blue lights raced toward his location, he had believed he was untouchable. He was young, handsome, and he had discovered a lifestyle that made him feel invincible. Women, older, wealthier women, were more than willing to pay for his company, his body, his charm. A few $100s here, a few hundred there, it added up. It carried him through school, it bought him clothes, it gave him a life his classmates couldn't imagine. And when graduation came, he didn't stop. Why would he? Money was easy, and pleasure was currency, but nothing prepared him for the night he met her. She was 71 years old, but age didn't matter when she dangled an offer he couldn't refuse. $5,000, not for a month, not for a week, $5,000 in a single night. It was more than he had ever touched at once. The text exchange was brief, almost businesslike, and before he could even question it, he was at her door. That was where things started to blur. Her house was quiet, too quiet, as if it was sealed off from the rest of the world. The lights were dim, the air faintly perfumed with something sweet, but beneath it, there was another scent he couldn't quite place. She welcomed him in with a smile that never reached her eyes. A drink was poured, a toast was made, the money was promised. He told himself it was routine, just another job. But the longer he stayed, the more he felt something was off. In the middle of the night, in the middle of the act, he swore he heard footsteps upstairs. A faint shift in the shadows, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye. When he tried to look, her hand would pull his face back, her voice a sharp whisper. Focus. Stay with me. And he did. Against his better judgment, he stayed. The next morning, everything changed. He woke with his body heavy, his chest tight, his skin burning as though something beneath it was unraveling. At first he thought it was just exhaustion, maybe a hangover from the strong drink she had handed him the night before. But when he tried to rise, pain cut through him like a blade. It wasn't normal. It wasn't explainable. And the smell was unbearable. Like decay, like death itself clinging to him. He called out for her, but the house answered with silence. The woman who had promised him riches was gone, leaving only empty rooms and the echo of his own desperate voice. That was when panic truly set in. He staggered to the bathroom, gripping the walls for balance, and when the light flicked on, what he saw in the mirror nearly stopped his heart. His skin, his flesh, parts of it were darkening, splitting, as if something inside was eating its way out. His reflection wasn't just pale, it was dying, and that was only the beginning. Before the day was over, police and paramedics would find him trembling, incoherent, begging them to believe a story too strange for reason. A story that would lead detectives into one of the most disturbing cases they had ever seen in their careers. A case where science offered no explanation, and justice would have to come in ways no one expected. Because this wasn't just a reckless young man chasing easy money. This was a descent into something far more sinister. From the outside, he looked like every other young man in his 20s. A polished smile, a well-cut fade, clothes that hugged his frame just right. To anyone who didn't know him, he was the type of guy who seemed to always have things figured out. Confident, attractive, the sort who walked into a room and turned heads. But what most people didn't realize was that none of it came from a 9-to-5 job. None of it came from a family inheritance, and none of it came from scholarships. His life, his lifestyle was funded by something else entirely. For him, money didn't come from paychecks. It came from bedrooms. It started in college, back when he was still a student with more bills than he could keep up with. Tuition fees, rent, textbooks, everything added up, and his part-time job at the campus bookstore barely covered groceries. He was smart enough to know that grinding paycheck to paycheck wasn't going to cut it. He needed a faster way. a way to survive. That's when he stumbled into the world of online chats. At first, it was innocent. He joined forums, messaging apps, places where people connected casually. But then the conversations shifted. Older women, sometimes twice his age, sometimes more, began showing interest. They complimented his smile, his energy, his youth. And then came the offers, small at first. Come spend the evening with me, I'll make it worth your while. $200, $300, enough to pay off overdue bills, enough to put food in the fridge. The first time, he told himself it was a one-time thing, just a quick fix for a desperate situation. But then one night turned into two turned into weeks, and before long it became a pattern, a cycle. He realized he could do in a single night what it took his classmates a month of grinding shifts to make. It was fast money, and it was addictive. Soon he wasn't just scraping by, he was thriving. His wardrobe changed. His sneakers were always fresh. He moved into a better apartment off campus. He walked through the university halls with a confidence that made others assume he had wealthy parents backing him. In reality, the women were his ATM. And the more he leaned into it, the more he stopped seeing it as something shameful. To him, it was just business. But business came with a cost. The women weren't girls his age. They were often in their 40s, 50s, sometimes even 60s. Divorced, widowed, or simply lonely, they saw in him what their peers no longer offered: youth, energy, a sense of vitality they craved. Some treated him like a secret indulgence, a fling they could never talk about in public. Others became dangerously attached, showering him with money and gifts, calling him daily, trying to mold him into something he could never be. By the time graduation came, he had grown used to the lifestyle, used to easy money, used to the attention. While his classmates stressed about job applications, unpaid internships, and starting salaries barely enough to cover rent, he saw no reason to stop. Why settle for $15 an hour when he could pocket $500 by midnight? So he kept going. But behind the flashy lifestyle there were cracks. Nights where he came home and stared at himself in the mirror, wondering if he was selling pieces of himself he could never get back. Nights where he brushed off the feeling that he was walking a thin line, a line that could collapse at any moment. He told himself he was in control. He told himself he could stop whenever he wanted. But deep down, he knew the truth. The money had him hooked. And then came the night that would change everything. It started like any other evening. He was scrolling through his messages, filtering through the usual offers, when a new notification appeared. The profile didn't have a picture at first, just a username and a short bio. Something about the way the words were written caught his attention. Formal, almost old-fashioned, not like the playful, flirty messages he was used to. "Hello," the first message read. "I've seen you online before. You look different. You carry yourself with a certain confidence I admire. I wonder if you might be interested in meeting." He smirked, half expecting another lowball offer. But as the conversation unfolded, his eyebrows lifted. The woman introduced herself as Margaret, 71 years old. She didn't hide her age. In fact, she leaned into it, talking about how experience was a gift, how she valued honesty above all. She told him she had been following his posts for a while, intrigued by his energy. Then, with a boldness that surprised even him, she made her offer. One night, $5,000. Cash. He read the number twice, then a third time. His mouth went dry. 5,000. In all his years doing this, the most he had ever gotten in a single night was around 700, and even that had felt like hitting the jackpot. But this? This was beyond his imagination. It wasn't just money for rent or clothes. This was money that could change things. He could pay off debts, stash away savings, finally breathe easy. Still, a small voice inside him whispered warnings. Why would anyone offer that much for just one night? Why her? Why now? Something about it didn't add up. But the lure of the money drowned out the doubts. He typed back a simple reply. When and where? Her response came almost instantly. An address. A time. A promise that everything would be ready. As he closed his phone that night, he felt the familiar rush, the anticipation of easy money, the thrill of what was to come. But beneath it, buried where he refused to look too closely, was a chill. A sense that he had just stepped into something different, something darker. And by the time he realized just how different it was, it would already be too late. The drive to the address she had sent him felt longer than usual, even though it wasn't more than 40 minutes from his apartment. He had the GPS guiding him, yet every turn carried a heaviness he couldn't explain. Normally, he'd be blasting music, hyping himself up before a night of work. But this time he rode in silence, gripping the wheel tighter than usual, his mind replaying the promise Margaret had made. $5,000. It was surreal. Too surreal. He pulled into a quiet, tree-lined suburban street. One of those neighborhoods that felt frozen in time, where every lawn was trimmed, every house sat neatly in place, and the silence was almost oppressive. Her home was larger than he expected. A 2-story brick house with ivy creeping along the side, the kind of place that looked both elegant and intimidating. The curtains were drawn, but a faint golden glow seeped through, suggesting someone was awake and waiting. He checked himself in the rearview mirror, adjusted his collar and reminded himself, it's just another night. Easy money. When he knocked, the door opened almost instantly, as if she had been standing there anticipating him. Hello, she said softly. Her voice was warm but carried an undercurrent he couldn't quite place. Margaret stood in the doorway, her silver hair pinned back neatly, her frame draped in a silk robe that shimmered under the light. Her eyes studied him with unsettling focus, like she wasn't just looking at him, but into him. You must be Daniel. She said his name as though she had been waiting to say it aloud for a long time. He forced a smile, his usual charm kicking in. And you must be Margaret. She stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Please come in. I've prepared something for you. The moment he crossed the threshold, he felt it. The air inside was different, cooler, heavier, carrying the faint scent of something herbal, almost medicinal. The living room was immaculate, furnished with antiques that seemed older than his grandparents. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, its sound far too loud in the otherwise quiet house. Have a seat, Margaret said, her smile never faltering. She moved with surprising grace for her age, gliding toward a sideboard where a tray of glasses sat. She poured 2 drinks, deep red wine that caught the light like liquid rubies, and handed him one. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. He clinked his against hers, the crystal ringing sharply in the stillness, and took a cautious sip. The wine was strong, richer than anything he'd had before, and it burned slightly as it slid down his throat. Margaret sat across from him, her gaze locked onto his face as if memorizing every feature. She asked him about his life, about school, about why he chose this arrangement. Normally he hated when clients got too personal, but something about her tone made it hard to resist answering. She listened intently, nodding at times, smiling faintly, her eyes never leaving his. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere shifted. She leaned closer, her hand brushing against his as she refilled his glass. Her laughter was soft, almost girlish, yet it carried an echo that unsettled him. Finally she rose, smoothing her robe. Shall we go upstairs? He followed her, the creak of the staircase beneath his feet amplifying the silence. The upstairs hallway was dim, lined with framed portraits whose eyes seemed to follow him as he passed. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow shift in one of the doorways, but when he blinked, it was gone. He shook his head, telling himself he was imagining things. Margaret's bedroom was vast, draped in heavy curtains that shut out the outside world. A faint incense burned in the corner, filling the air with a scent he couldn't place. She turned to him, untied the sash of her robe, and let it fall. He had seen plenty of women undress before, but something about the way she did it felt different, not rushed, not insecure. It was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if every movement had meaning. They moved to the bed, and though he tried to focus on the act itself, the money, the performance he was used to delivering, his mind kept wandering. At one point, he swore he heard footsteps in the hallway outside. At another, he thought he caught the faint sound of breathing that wasn't theirs. His chest tightened, and he started to glance toward the door. But before he could, Margaret cupped his face in her hands and turned him back toward her. Her grip was firmer than he expected, her eyes blazing with an intensity that pinned him in place. "Don't," she whispered. "Stay with me. Look at me." Her voice was commanding, almost desperate, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he obeyed. As the night went on, the unease only grew. He felt a prickle along his skin, as though invisible eyes were watching every move. He tried to shake it off, tried to convince himself it was just his nerves playing tricks. But every time he shifted, every time he thought about glancing over his shoulder, Margaret would touch his face, press her lips to his ear and murmur, "Focus, don't look away." Hours blurred into each other until exhaustion overtook him. His body gave in, heavy and drained, sinking into the sheets. Margaret's presence lingered beside him, her breathing steady, her hand resting lightly on his chest. His last thought before sleep claimed him was that maybe it was worth it. The strangeness, the unease, the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. All of it faded beneath the promise of $5,000. But deep down, buried beneath the haze of wine and exhaustion, was a truth he couldn't ignore. Something about this night felt final, and as he drifted into unconsciousness, the house seemed to hum around him. The walls breathed, the floorboards groaned, and somewhere, in the silence between heartbeats, he could have sworn he heard a whisper not belonging to either of them. When morning came, nothing would ever be the same. Morning crept in slowly, though you wouldn't know it by looking around the house. Heavy curtains kept out any hint of daylight, and the air felt thick, unmoving. Daniel stirred, his body heavy with a drowsiness that was unlike any hangover he had ever known. His eyes fluttered open, adjusting slowly to the dimness. Something wasn't right. The first sensation was weakness. His limbs felt like they were made of lead, each movement requiring far more effort than it should. He blinked hard, trying to clear the fog from his mind. The events of the previous night flickered back to him in fragments. Margaret's eyes, her voice, the incense, the way she kept pulling his face toward hers whenever he tried to look away. Now, lying there, he reached to the other side of the bed. Empty. The sheets were cool, untouched, as if she had never been there at all. "Margaret?" he called out, his voice hoarse. No answer. The silence pressed down on him, amplified by the hollow echo of his own voice. With effort, he pushed himself upright, the room tilting dangerously as he tried to stand. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through his lower abdomen, making him double over. He clenched his teeth, gasping. "What the hell?" he muttered, pressing his hand to his stomach. The pain grew sharper, radiating downward, twisting, gnawing at him from the inside out. His breath quickened, panic setting in. He stumbled toward the edge of the bed, trying to pull on his clothes, but the simple act of bending down sent another wave of agony ripping through him. That's when the smell hit him. At first it was faint, like damp wood left to rot in the rain. But within seconds it grew stronger, fouler, wrapping around him like an invisible fog. He gagged, covering his nose, but the stench clung to him, coming not from the room, but from himself. His hands shook as he fumbled for the bathroom door. He staggered inside, flipped on the light, and what he saw in the mirror nearly dropped him to his knees. His skin, his flesh. There were dark patches blooming along his abdomen, the colour of spoiled meat. Veins stood out in sickly blue and black, crawling like roots beneath the surface, and lower, Just below his waist, the rot was worse. Flesh breaking down, decaying before his eyes. His body wasn't healing, wasn't bruised. It was dying. Alive. No, no, no. Oh God, what is happening to me? His voice cracked into a sob, echoing back against the tiled walls. He tore his gaze away from the mirror, clutching the sink as another wave of pain made him retch. He called again for Margaret, his voice breaking, but the house gave nothing back. Just silence. Just that emptiness. His breaths came in short, panicked bursts. He needed help. Now. With trembling hands, he searched for his phone, finding it discarded on the nightstand. He nearly dropped it twice before he managed to dial 911. The line clicked. 911, what's your emergency? Daniel's voice shook so violently that the words came out in gasps. I need help, please. Something's wrong with me. I'm dying. Sir, calm down. Tell me your name and your location. He choked back a cry, pressing the phone tighter to his ear. My name's Daniel, I'm at... He rattled off the address, his voice faltering. Please, you have to hurry. I don't know what she did to me. My body, it's rotting. The dispatcher paused, her tone shifting to careful reassurance. Sir, listen to me. Stay calm. Help is on the way. Can you describe what's happening to you? Tears blurred his vision as he stared down at himself, at the horrifying decay spreading across his skin. It's my body. My flesh. It's like it's rotting, like it's being eaten from the inside out. My manhood, it's falling apart. His voice cracked into hysteria. Sir, I need you to stay on the line. Paramedics and police are en route. Just keep talking to me. Daniel stumbled back against the wall, clutching his stomach as the pain surged again. His whole body shook, sweat dripping down his face. His mind raced with flashes of Margaret's hands holding him down, her voice whispering, "Don't look away." The house had seemed alive, breathing, watching. What did she do to me? He whispered, though not to the dispatcher. To himself, to anyone who might have the answer. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through the silence, faint but growing louder. Relief and terror crashed into him all at once. He slid down to the floor, curling against the wall, the phone still pressed to his ear. "They're coming, sir," the dispatcher said. "Stay with me. Just hang on." But Daniel wasn't sure how much longer he could hang on. His vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges. The smell of rot was overwhelming now, filling the air, seeping into everything. And as the sirens grew louder, he realized with dread certainty, whatever had begun in Margaret's house wasn't going to stop just because help had arrived. This was only the beginning. The sirens carried him through the streets like a wailing promise, but Daniel barely registered the ride. He lay strapped to the gurney in the back of the ambulance, writhing, clutching at his abdomen as two paramedics exchanged alarmed looks. The smell was unbearable. One of them fought the urge to gag as he cut away Daniel's shirt to check his vitals. "Jesus Christ," the younger medic whispered, pulling back as the sight of blackened flesh revealed itself. "It's like he's decomposing." "Keep pressure on him," the older medic barked, though his voice cracked in disbelief. He had seen stabbings, overdoses, even burn victims. But this? Flesh rotting while the man was still alive, still screaming. No, this wasn't possible. Daniel caught their words in broken pieces, his body shuddering as pain seared through him like molten knives. He tried to speak, his throat dry, but only a rasp escaped. When the ambulance screeched into the ER bay, a team of nurses and doctors was already waiting. They rushed forward, wheeling him out under harsh fluorescent lights. Faces blurred around him as commands were shouted. "BP is crashing! Get me a line in! Check for sepsis! His skin integrity is... God, what is this?" The stench followed him into the trauma room, filling it, seeping into every corner. Doctors moved with urgency, but their expressions betrayed their confusion. This wasn't a case they had trained for. Hours blurred into fragments. Daniel drifted in and out, sometimes aware of the bright surgical lamps above him, sometimes sinking into blackness. He caught snatches of voices. No sign of any venereal disease. Cultures came back negative. No bacteria, no fungi, nothing. Then what the hell is causing it? His tissues are breaking down faster than anything I've seen. It's like necrosis on steroids. Necrosis, that was the word. He clung to it even as the syllables slipped away in the haze of his pain. Later, when he opened his eyes again, a figure stood at the foot of his bed. Not a doctor. A man in a worn suit, his badge hanging from his belt. His face was lined, eyes weary but sharp. Detective Harris. 23 years on the force. He had seen everything. Homicides that turned stomachs, overdoses in filthy apartments, suicides that left families shattered. But nothing in his career prepared him for what lay in the hospital bed. Daniel's skin was greyish, mottled with black and purple. The monitors beeped weakly, charting a life force that seemed to be draining minute by minute. "Son," the detective said, voice low, steady, though he kept a safe distance from the bed. "I need you to tell me what happened. Who did this to you?" Daniel tried to answer, but his lips trembled, his body convulsing in small spasms. His throat felt raw, as though his very voice was decaying along with his flesh. Harris leaned closer. "Take your time. Just tell me what you can." Finally, with a strength he didn't know he still had, Daniel whispered, "A woman. I met her online. Older. Said 71. The detective's brows furrowed. "A woman. Do you know her name?" Daniel's eyes flickered. "Margaret." His voice cracked into a cough, wet and harsh. "House was big, old, curtains drawn, like it was waiting for me." He winced, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes as the pain tore through him again. The machines beeped frantically, nurses rushing in to check him. Harris stepped back, jaw tight, absorbing every detail. "Margaret," he repeated quietly to himself. "We'll find her." But the victim's words didn't stop there. As he drifted in and out, Daniel mumbled, "She wouldn't let me look away. People. In the shadows. I felt them." His breathing grew shallow, erratic. She did something to me. The nurses moved quickly, one of them warning the detective. "You'll have to step out, sir. He's unstable." Harris nodded, though his eyes stayed locked on Daniel's fading figure. He had worked cases that defied reason before, but something about this, about the stench of decay still clinging to the air, the raw terror in the boy's voice, told him this wasn't going to be solved with paperwork and procedure. This was darker, older, something that didn't belong in any police report. As the doors swung shut behind him, the detective glanced back one last time. Daniel was still alive, for now. But Harris knew the truth deep down. They weren't just fighting to save a young man's life. They were standing against something they didn't understand. The sirens Daniel had heard crashing through the silence of that nightmare morning grew louder, sharper, until they swallowed the air. Red and blue light splashed across the front windows of Margaret's home, reflecting against curtains that swayed as though stirred by something unseen. The first officers on scene expected to find a frantic elderly woman, or perhaps some panicked intruder. Instead, they were greeted by silence. The front door was ajar, creaking faintly. Inside, the air was heavy with an odour that didn't belong in a suburban neighbourhood. Chemicals, something acrid and strange, and underneath it all, the faint sourness of rot. "Police! Anyone inside?" one officer called out, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The house felt staged. The living room was tidy, almost too tidy. Furniture arranged perfectly, no signs of a struggle, no dishes out of place. Yet, as the team moved deeper, details began to disturb. On the dining table there were 3 glasses. Only one had been used. The others were spotless, as if waiting. Upstairs, in a locked drawer, detectives found IDs belonging to several young men, some going back years. Daniel was not her first. And then there was the room. Down a narrow hallway at the back of the house, they forced open a door. What greeted them was worse than any crime scene most of these officers had encountered. Journals, stacked high, page after page filled with erratic handwriting. Some were obsessive notes, times, dates, names. Others read like ritualistic entries, disturbing ramblings about taking youth to preserve what time steals. In the corner sat glass vials, some shattered, containing unknown liquids. A foul odour seeped from a rusted metal bin that no one dared open until hazmat arrived. One officer muttered under his breath, "What the hell was she doing here?" Margaret herself was nowhere to be found. The house looked abandoned, as though she had vanished minutes before the sirens cut through the night. Back at the hospital, Daniel fought to stay alive. Tubes and wires surrounded him. His once athletic, vibrant body was deteriorating in front of horrified doctors. The rapid tissue necrosis wasn't localized anymore. It was spreading, consuming him at a speed no medical text could explain. He would wake for moments, eyes wide with terror, then slip back into unconsciousness. A detective leaned over his bed during one of those fleeting windows of clarity. "Daniel, can you hear me? You said a woman. What woman?" His lips trembled, barely forming words. Margaret, 71, online, her house, red shutters, end of the street." His voice broke, raw, terrified. He tried to say more, but then his eyes glazed, drifting, as though the memory itself was too heavy. The detective pressed. "Daniel, what else? What did she do to you?" A whisper, barely audible. "She's not done. She won't stop." And then silence. Machine's word. His chest rose and fell shallowly. Hours later, Daniel was gone. The case gained immediate attention. Local news picked it up first. College graduate dies after mysterious encounter. Then regional stations. Soon, the nation was watching. For detectives, though, this wasn't about headlines. It was about a predator still on the loose. They tracked Margaret's bank accounts, traced her online activity, pulled up security footage from her neighbourhood. For a week, she was a ghost. No purchases, no sightings, nothing. Until a tip came in. A motel, 2 counties away. A guest had checked in under a false name, but the clerk swore the woman looked odd. Older, pale, like her skin was falling off. The description sent a chill through the entire task force. They moved fast. When police entered that dim motel room, even the seasoned among them had to steady themselves. Margaret was there, slumped against the wall, her body collapsing in on itself. Her skin was mottled, decayed, as though she were rotting alive from the inside out, the same way Daniel had described. Her eyes flickered open as they approached, but there was no fight left in her, only a look of grim recognition, almost as if she knew this was always how it would end. She didn't live long enough to be questioned. Within hours, she was gone. The coroner later confirmed. No disease, no poison, no infection explained what happened to her. The rapid necrosis matched Daniel's, but there was no traceable pathogen, nothing to put in a report. It was, in the words of one doctor, a death without reason. Detectives pieced together what they could. The journals revealed patterns. Margaret had lured at least 6 young men in the last decade. Some had disappeared, others had simply moved away, their families never knowing the truth. It was clear she'd been preying on them, perhaps experimenting, perhaps feeding some delusion of eternal youth. Whether she was dabbling in untested chemicals or something darker, no one could say. But what was undeniable was this: Daniel wasn't her first victim. He was her last. The aftermath left ripples. Daniel's family wept, devastated but relieved that at least the truth had surfaced. His father stood outside the courthouse steps when detectives held a press conference, holding back tears as he said, "He was reckless, yes, but he was my son. He didn't deserve this." The detectives themselves admitted it was one of the strangest cases of their careers. We've seen everything: homicides, overdoses, even bizarre cult cases. But this? A woman rotting alive with no medical explanation. It's not something we'll ever forget. The medical community published quiet papers, cautiously phrasing it as unexplained necrotizing syndrome. Privately, many doctors admitted they had never seen anything like it. As for Margaret, she was buried in an unmarked grave. No family claimed her, no mourners attended. In the end, justice didn't come from a courtroom or prison walls. It came in the same grotesque form she had unleashed on others. The same decay, the same pain, the same terror. Some called it coincidence. Others whispered about karma, divine retribution, or something far older than science could measure. The case file closed with more questions than answers. But one chilling detail stood out. Inside Margaret's final journal, on the very last page, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "The youth will always rot, starting with me." And so, Daniel's story ended in tragedy, but not without a cruel kind of justice. Margaret's secret died with her, or perhaps it still lingers, waiting for the next reckless soul to take the wrong step into the wrong house. Because some crimes, no matter how carefully hidden, come back for their owner. And this time the punishment was written in the flesh.